The record company then was where all the action was, because that's where all the money was. And so the record company dictated everything. 2018 represents the first year that recording revenue has come back to pre-2008 levels.
So since you've been around the industry for quite some time, how have you seen the role of the manager evolve over the past 15, 20 years? If you feel like it has, but
It totally has. It totally has. And that's a great question. And it's funny, it's something that I didn't fully realize until I started to manage. When I was at the record company, you have to imagine that when I got into the business 20 years ago, records was the way that everybody made money. You certainly had some revenue coming in from your touring if you were a big regional or national act. But if you were just a local act, you maybe didn't have a lot of touring money, but you still had some record money, either because you were able to get a deal, and so there's a record royalty coming at you, and that was most of what consumers were buying. Or if you were an indie, you were able to sell that physical product for $15 or $20 a CD. And if you could manufacture it for less than $3 or $4 a unit, as an indie, that was decent money.
Right.
Even if you weren't going to move very many. So the record company then was where all the action was, because that's where all the money was. And so the record company dictated everything. And I like to think of it as like the record company was in the center of a wheel, and all the spokes that came out from the wheel were all of the other functions, whether it was a publicist or an indie promoter or the manager or the artist, because it was the record company making the money. And it was the record company saying, this is what we do next. Mm-hmm. And because that's where the money was, everybody listened to what the record company had to say.
Right.
What has shifted, and it's kind of shifted in two ways. And one of them is obviously the record revenue is not as large a piece of the pie anymore. And this year, actually 2018 represents the first year that recording revenue has come back to pre-2008 levels. And I remember being at the labels in 2008, and it was we were like falling off a cliff. So it's nice to know that the record business now is at least back to that point. Mm-hmm. But what has changed, of course, is that the record company doesn't have the same kind of clout that it used to. And the other revenue streams have all risen in stature. And so the manager and the artist are now in the center of that circle. And all the spokes lead out to the other players. But the record company now is at the end of one of those spokes, as opposed to being in the middle of that wheel. And so I think about, the other part of this, when I planned the recording sessions, the manager was always the one that I dealt with for two things. They were calling me to find out if I was making the money move wherever it needed to move, whether it was the artist or to whoever needed to get paid in order to get the record made. The other thing that they were doing was just making sure that the artist showed up where we told them, where the label said, your session's going to be here, or your session's going to be there, or we need you to be at this thing or be at that thing. And then it was the manager's job to handle that logistics. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, I don't ever want to be a manager, because all they do is babysit. They do two things. They call the label, and they try and shake the label to make the money fall out. And then when they're not doing that, they're trying to make sure that the artist shows up wherever the label is telling them they're supposed to be. Right. And so I didn't want to do that. But as time wore on, and what I realized when I started to manage was that those two things are very, very small components of the overall pie now. And so that's what makes management so interesting, is You have all of these other revenue streams. They're all much more important than they used to be. Each artist has a different mix of them, and as a manager, the puzzle is to figure out, well, which of these things makes the most money, which of these things can we support, how do we go about this, and how do I run the entire team of people. So you can really be an entrepreneur in a way that you weren't previously, and that's a super fascinating change.
Right. So I like to look at it as a manager these days is more like a business developer, in
Yes.
business development. However, I'm just going to take the side of a manager because I've been a manager now for 8+ years. So even though that role has changed, and I would say assumed more responsibility, the typical percentage hasn't changed, right? Even though I think
that managers feel that squeeze, right? Where managers make 15 to 20% of an artist's gross earnings. But now managers it isn't as simple as just calling the label and making that advance money show up, or being able to ride the royalty stream that's generated. You have to, be out there hustling to create new opportunities for your client, to create new revenue streams for your client. And also, I feel like the business now is so much more fragmented that it's difficult to, when you look at the picture of where does this revenue come from, it's very difficult to prioritize your time, because you can't say, 40% of it is coming from records and 30% of it is coming from touring, so that's what I'm going to do. And there's 70%, and the other 30% is all in development. We'll figure that out. And now it's like 5 here, or 10 there, or 15 there. And so it's much more difficult, because you have to ask yourself, well, which of these things is actually worth my time? Right. But your percentage, your commission as a manager, is unchanged. And so you're in that place where you're getting squeezed, because you have to, in essence, do more work and know that you're going to, on a overall basis, generate less money. Doesn't mean you're generating less money for your client necessarily, but there might be a little bit less money in it for you in comparison to how much work you're doing.
Right. No, I wanted to bring that to light, because I feel like at the end of the day, everybody feels like they're not being compensated what they should be, right? Like songwriters, artists, managers, labels, everybody feels like they deserve 4 slices of a pie, and there's like 10 people and 10 slices, and everybody wants 4 or 5 slices. And it's just, a lot of times I think that's where some of the tension comes from, and it's misconstrued as a shady business. I mean, don't get me wrong. I definitely think sometimes things are shady, but more often than not, I think it's just, I value myself, or, something at a certain amount, you value at a certain amount, and we just don't have a meeting of the minds. And then people come in and say, oh no, that's just shady business. Like, no, I just value this at 7, you value it at 5. We just can't deal right now. And I think that, of course we have a history of skepticism and shadiness in this industry, but I think a lot of it's just a lack of education and just misvaluing things. That's really what I see from the outside looking in and being part of some situation.